Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we are back to another live stream of Shadowverse. Today is Monday, October 11th, once again starting later, which kind of sucks because I should have been able to adjust my sleep schedule better than this for the internet installer that I'm expecting tomorrow, so yeah, that sucks. I'll have to try to set an alarm clock, and I suppose it is worth mentioning that being a YouTuber has allowed me to certainly not have to rely on alarm clocks, which never really worked for me anyways. Like in the entirety of my life, they've never consistently worked, other than they wake me up and then I turn over and snooze it and then fall back asleep without even remembering that I've done that. Let's go ahead and replace these private matches because you're just never going to get a private match at all. I guess we're going to be playing Forestcraft today. Over the weekend, I've been playing a little bit of Lego Pirates of the Caribbean. It, for the most part, is 99% bug-free. In the display full screen optimization option being enabled and setting it to act in compatibility mode to treat it like Windows 7. Honestly, I'm not sure if I shouldn't drop back down to even Windows Vista for Lego games, but I've been able to play 2 or 3 levels without any of the micro stuttering issues or lockup or hitching issues. But when you get into the hub world, there is just a slight hitch, it seems like, as things load in. Which, yeah, all of this should have been patched a very long time ago by TT Games to just make sure that these games that obviously would be still very popular play well on PC. And so you still very much are in the case of saying you should play Lego games on consoles and not play Lego games on PC. But it is tolerable, at least so far. I really have to question the value in reskinning all of this. If anything, all this seems to be trying to do in Shadowverse is it's fairly obvious as to what they're trying to do here. They have reskinned all of the screen because eventually they're going to just reskin all of the original Shadowverse game and make it look exactly like the anime, and eventually the final step will be they will get rid of all the character skins and all of the card art that is not kid friendly, and they are trying to take what is a 4-year already established more adult collectible card game and turn it into a kids game. And this is not a better interface by any means. The interface on Shadowverse is already garbage. It's way too much stuff, and they repeat that mistake in the UI as much as they do in the challenges. But yeah, we'll see this screen get changed, I'm sure, and we'll see every other screen get changed. And maybe for legacy players, you'll be able to keep the artwork and the character things you've unlocked, so they don't piss off the legacy players too much. But we'll see this changed, and it will stop showing us cards that have shirtless guys on it. We'll see a lot of backgrounds like this one, which is uglier and just more cartoony.
I guess you're looking for a fight.
Like, you really cannot pull this off and without people complaining. And it's not... what was I gonna say? I lost my train of thought just in the middle of that conversation there. Like, it was totally acceptable, in my opinion, to start and have a spin-off and try to make a kid-friendly version of your game. But it wasn't very reasonable to believe that this wasn't going to be the final outcome. And it's fairly obvious that this is what's going to happen, is that they are going to try and turn this into such a kid-friendly product that you're going to none of the old people are really going to want to play anymore. And maybe at this point none of the old people want to play anymore anyways. You're definitely not growing your audience in a natural way by basically changing it and trying to reboot. We've never seen an example of rebooting a game, a collectible card game. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know if there really would be a way to reboot a collectible card game, either in a real world card game with print cards or in the old world. I think Pokemon as a card game probably shifted its rules and expanded its rules over time enough that you would definitely say the Pokemon at launch as a collectible card game is very different from the Pokemon the Pokemon at launch, the Pokemon card game as it is now. But let's go ahead and attack here, then return this one. And hit,
Unbelievable.
and hit.
Unbelievable.
And we'll do that. I would say if you look at like the history of Magic the Gathering, I think most Magic the Gathering people would probably say, and I'm really guessing here, that the idea of like planeswalkers being added was the biggest change that happened to Magic the Gathering, in the planeswalker cards. But the rest of what Magic the Gathering over its many years of existing has been so iterative that it never felt like a full-on reboot. And it thematically, I don't think any card game has changed drastically. When they started doing actual animated commercials for Hearthstone, that made the game feel like it was targeting kids a lot more than what I thought Hearthstone really was targeting. But the actual game mechanics and the actual cards didn't change that much, although Hearthstone did also engage in the concepts of censorship, which I think at this point, if you are going to have a collectible card game, you need to establish very early whether or not it's going to be an adult game or a kid's game, and not make the mistake that Hearthstone did, where it got small backlash, but backlash nonetheless for censorship. And Magic the Gathering has censored things, but I'm not sure if they've censored things particularly because of gore or just too much skin showing, as much as they've censored things for the artists who made the art. Although it does seem like we aren't too far away from Hasbro starting to censor the art for skin showing.
It won't be long now.
Because it definitely does feel like some of the Magic the Gathering changes are going into that deep SJW direction. Allied spells do 1+1 damage. Well,
I'm out of cash.
and I, in all fairness, do suspect that the Magic the Gathering, no, the Marvel collectible card game will probably be very kid friendly, so I am not expecting a lot from that. I'll be frankly fairly shocked even if they have like Black Cat and Spider-Girl and things like that in particularly skin tight bodysuits showing a lot of like cleavage curvature. This is going to be ridiculous if I lose, and I think I am going to. Yeah, so over the weekend, I did upload videos, didn't schedule videos. I'm awful at that. I just never do that work. The Halloween stuff is happening. So, like Hellblade's Suna's Sacrifice aired or premiered today. And Left 4 Dead, I think, premiered either Friday or today. So, yeah. My meager offerings as far as Halloween month are starting to air kind of late into October. But whatever. I think we probably will end up doing that just because it's too difficult to try and schedule things to line up on October 1st and then end at November 1st or October 31st.
Fun it is to converse.
But yeah.
No way.
That's pretty much all I did, playing Lego and played some other games. I guess as a slight addendum, playing Shadow Hands, the solitaire game. I played a little bit of that to get defeated on hard mode, and that that was more work than I probably should have put into it, and I've been trying to play some of the other games that have a small chance of getting achievements, but they're getting in the way of actually making content. So did some Lego, did the Lego bonsai tree. It's a nice set, but it's got a ton of little pieces. It gives you two options where the bonsai tree can have either green leaves or pink leaves with pink frogs to look like sakura petals or pink petals. I don't even know if they would actually be cherry blossom bonsai trees or not. Come to think of it, that very possibly is not what they are. You get a lot of weird brown pieces in the set, so it's a pretty decent set, but you would be hard pressed, I think, to buy more than two of them, one for each of the two variations, unless you had a very specific need for a lot of brown pieces. And it's not like you get a lot of the same brown pieces, you're getting a weird mix of brown pieces. Or unless you just needed a ton of leaves, green leaves, or a ton of pink frogs and white leaves. Yeah. it is pretty difficult to calculate if you were building something new from scratch with Lego, which sets you would buy as a good deal to get the pieces. That is a skill that is above me.
My quarry won't escape that
And then,
easy. You dare
because
to
there
defy the
was
shadows?
thunderstorms that were making a lot of noise and potentially threatening for my power to go out, I started immediately on last year's like elf house, Christmas village elf house, which that's pretty much how I do it. Is I try to get the Christmas sets a year in advance. That way you're not having to potentially deal with shortages and wait so you can build a Christmas village house. Otherwise, I've been very bad about doing Lego, and so I have at least 5 or 6 fairly expensive sets that have been sitting around for a year.
Stay away.
That is delightful.
Let's see.
It looks like I'm up.
But yeah.
And so our pact is finished.
Yeah, we should just go through the news. There's not a ton of news and not a ton of games that came out over the weekend. But if we can burn through all of that, we could do some fall list cleanup, and there is a ton of fall list games to try and consider yet again and
The uncharted desert awaits.
figure out if we want to go in that direction or not.
Hey, let's play. Is that how you treat a lady?
Alright, so yeah, let's go through the video game news. One of the things I'm still definitely toying with in my mind is there a way
Check out my fancy footwear.
to potentially adjust or fix the way I present news and just get away from doing much collectible card game things? Is there a slower game that would make more sense? Because in theory, I could just bring out Shadowhand and I could just be playing solitaire, but then the game kind of doesn't move at all while I'm talking. Like, I really would need something that's close to just a screensaver. That's the real desire here, is if there was just a screensaver, if this was just a video playing and it didn't really matter what it was showing, that would be ideal. I'm dropping a lot of frames. So, let me just make sure I'm not downloading things. I'm gonna mute myself for a second. One moment.
Come, show me the limits of your will. So, we'll do this the hard way. Lose yourself in this final dance. Amuse
Better than in the cradle.
ready yourself.
Best of luck to you.
Okay, yeah, I don't know what's going on. I did make some changes to my router, and maybe I made things worse. Too worse. We'll see. Or it could have just been that something was downloading. I think something may have been. Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that. Let's keep on playing. Video Game Chronicle says it looks like a large Returnal update is currently being tested. A 6 GB beta patch could potentially add a much requested save feature, which, yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. It wouldn't have had a save feature in the first place. There's major problems with the game Returnal in the sense that it spent way too much time, I think, advertising itself and promoting itself and getting mainstream video game journalists to talk about it. And then the second it comes out, like so many other games, it just comes out like a wet fart, for lack of a better description. And there's just not anything that caught people's attention. The idea of a hyper-realistic graphical roguelike that is super difficult should have been appealing, but it's too dark. Its storyline seems to be kind of nothing. It's too difficult, and thematically it's kind of dull. Like, I would argue, as much as the edginess might have hurt Binding of Isaac being an edgy kind of anti-Christian story, its edginess created that cult following that let it gain some foothold and let the cult followers then convince other players that it actually was a good game, and it got enough reviews and enough good reception. Whereas there's no cult following really that I've seen for Returnal at all, so I don't think too many people played it. And I don't think it was an exclusive, like a Epic Game Store exclusive or anything like that, although that certainly would have hurt it if it was. The problem also is, if you have a 6 GB patch, that may just be redoing a lot of the game content that's already there, and just replacing it because of encryption or something. So I wouldn't be surprised if there actually isn't that much more content in it. And if it actually adds a save feature, then you just have to assume that they always planned on having a save feature, and they just screwed up and weren't done with the game when it launched. Which that is believable. That is totally 100% believable.
I'll see you in purgatory.
I won't let you get away. That beast is my savior.
Hey, let's play.
Let's see. So yeah, it's really impossible to potentially care about a Returnal patch. It's also fairly impossible to care about Far Cry 6. Apparently, according to Video Games Chronicle, Far Cry 6 has reportedly shipped the wrong versions in the UK, blocking upgrades. Which, okay. I don't think Far Cry 6 has been particularly well received there. I've just been wrecked again in a 1 or 2 turn victory move. It kind of really sucks in Shadowverse that anybody who is good at playing this game has this like 1 turn victory plan in their head where they've got 4 or 5 cards they can play that will win it for them, but they have to wait till like the 5th or 6th turn, and you almost never win before the first 5 turns. Which, if Shadowverse was a better card game, there would be some incredibly high risk scenario. There definitely were times in like Magic the Gathering where you could sacrifice on the first turn almost all your life and nearly and summon a super powerful character, but then that would give at least 1 turn of your opponent to either do 1 damage to you and kill you, or in some other way counter it. They tried really hard, I think, in Magic particularly to make it more balanced. Whereas the closest thing you have here is dealing damage to yourself over the course of 5 turns. There just feels like there is a complete and total desire here to make sure every game lasts at least 5 turns and probably on average 8 turns, which just wastes a lot of people's time. Yeah, I don't think people, though, that get back to Far Cry 6, I don't think people care about Far Cry 6. The Far Cry series, I think, has consistently shown itself to not be a series worth playing.
Uncharted desert awaits.
So if I was ever going to play a Far Cry series, it probably would be the Far Cry 3 or 4, the most popular one. It definitely wouldn't be 1 or 2. It definitely, I don't think, would be 5 or 6. I would frankly have to kind of scrape the bottom of the barrel even to think of a reason why to play the Far Cry series, because I think there are better characters out there, better games out there that ape the general gameplay style of Far Cry games better. Well, that was not the way to do that. Here we have Video Game Chronicles saying that the Jim Ryan, the CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment, it says he's frustrated PlayStation's games can't reach more players. I think he's the CEO. He's the boss, regardless, of Sony Interactive Entertainment of California. I'll add the of California.
You have summoned the blade of purgation here.
That's what I generally call it. There's a problem with him saying this, certainly. First of all, he's the boss, so he could make more games available on PC as far as the exclusives that they push heavily. And that would increase the reach. He certainly could let more games onto the Sony's platform in an uncensored way, so there would be more of a fan base. It's really hard to not just assume that this is 100% Jim Ryan's own fault, and sure, you could possibly blame some of the previous bosses before him, or the one previous boss before him, probably at most. Yeah, there was no reason to evolve that. But yeah,
Show me the limits of your will.
PlayStation in general, if we just get away from Jim Ryan's choices versus previous president's choices, they have done very little when it was more Sony of Japan to try and attract a lot of people away from Xbox. Like they really haven't done that. They've done very little to really try to compete with Nintendo's when you're talking the Wii U even, and the Switch. They've done, PlayStation has never tried to have a portable console in 5 generations. Well, no, that's not true. I'm completely forgetting about the PSP and the Vita, which I shouldn't do that. Since the PSP and Vita, PlayStation has done nothing to try and release a new portable console. Their PlayStation Now streaming service is garbage and not worth playing. Their lineup in general has always been very short and bad. So, yeah, they've failed to build the player base by having too few games, not a large enough variety of games. When Sony of Japan was in charge, they weren't making enough Western games. Even now, they are not making enough Western games. So, now, him saying he's frustrated, at a certain point, also, frustration is a symptom of impotence, for lack of a better word. Like, if he's frustrated that PlayStation games can't reach more players, it's simply because he's bad at his job. And I have to heavily lean on my own personal opinion there and say I think that is true. I think there's really no good reason, if you rewound back time to when the Sony PlayStation came out, and that would have been at least a year to maybe 3 or 4 years before the original Xbox came out. But even at that point, which the original Xbox came out and the PlayStation 2 probably would have been out there, there's no reason why Sony, which would have had all these licenses to Sony movies and Sony music, and you compare that to Microsoft, who has like no licenses to any movies or music at all. There's no reason why Sony shouldn't have been able to blow people out of the water with the PlayStation 3 in particular, and they failed miserably by trying to force people into cell processing and trying to step into Microsoft's domain much more than staying where they were comfortable with the licensing. Yeah, Sony just never wanted to spend the money. They never wanted to license things. Warner Brothers kind of has the same thing. As I'm playing Lego Pirates of the Caribbean and thinking about it, like, Warner Brothers owns Cartoon Network. There's really no reason why there isn't a Lego game based on every single Cartoon Network cartoon that's ever come out. Why is there not a smaller, shorter Adventure Time Lego game? In fairness, Warner Brothers does, outside of Cartoon Network and Hanna-Barbera, they also own Hanna-Barbera, so there's no reason why the subsidiary of Warner Brothers, TT Games, has not made a Jetsons Lego game, a Flintstones Lego game, a Looney Tunes Warner Brothers Lego game. Like, no reason whatsoever, other than internally they almost certainly are demanding high license fees from TT Games to pay to other sub-departments of Warner Brothers, instead of, and they're doing ridiculous Hollywood math instead of just saying, hey, let's make sure this happens, so we'll license this for $1 or we'll give it to you for free, since we're all owned by the same company anyways. And then there is really no reason why TT Games has not been, over the years, allowed to double in size so they could make twice as many Lego games. Kids would play twice as many Lego games. Okay. But yeah, the same problem runs into Sony. Sony, being a more mature console, easily could have had a movie tie-in game for a lot of the Sony movies that have come out. And it's probably not... No, we can do this. Let's just do top 100 Sony movies. Sony Pictures top 100 movie IMDb. Alright, if we look at this, and I probably should just curate this. They are making Spider-Man games. They aren't making James Bond games. Now, James Bond's makes a little sense. Some of the ratings here seem pretty terrible for it to be listed in the top. So maybe Sony movies in general just suck, or maybe this is just a terrible list somebody's made. Sort by popularity. See if that works. I should have attacked. This is a list made in 2013 too, so.
Okay.
Yeah, you have James Bond, James Bond, James Bond, James Bond, James Bond. James Bond, James Bond.
Like
Spider-Man. Ghostbusters game? Yes, there was a Ghostbusters video game that came out, not a Sony exclusive. Silence of the Lambs. A interesting idea, certainly something somebody should have attempted. There has been no video game, to my knowledge, based on Silence of the Lambs, or Red Dragon, or Manhunter, or the Hannibal TV series. Now, are you going to have an Adam Sandler tie-in video game? Probably not. The Fifth Element? I don't think there's been any video game around that. And there's really no reason why that shouldn't be the case. A Dracula-based game, I don't think has existed based on the Dracula movie of 1992. But there was at least a couple of Van Helsing's Spider-Man games, yes. A game based on The Social Network would not make a lot of sense, but a game based on the Men in Black series makes plenty of sense. Why is there not a big AAA game in that way? Jumanji. I think there have been some Nintendo spin-offs or mobile spin-offs of Jumanji and the sequels to Jumanji. No big AAA game. Hotel Transylvania. Yes, there is a game based on that on Steam. Not a big seller on PlayStation. Basic Instinct. Yeah. If Sony wanted to go in a really crazy direction and start trying to make video games that recreated the events of fairly old movies, adult movies, that would be very interesting, certainly. If you told me Sony made a video game based on Basic Instinct, I would probably check it out, frankly, and I've never even watched Basic Instinct, so I think that would be kind of really cool. Plus, I'm sure 1992 movies probably don't look that good unless they've been remastered, so it's a whole different way to reach a different audience. Grown Ups 2, probably not. Fury, looks like a military game, looks like it would have a justification. I don't think they ever made a Ghostbusters reboot game. Terminator, like the Terminator series. Has there been a recent Terminator video game? There was one based on Terminator Salvation that was really late, past the point when it came out, and wasn't very well covered. Total Recall, yeah, somewhere around 1990, I think there was a Total Recall game for like Windows 95, but not for PlayStation 3. A lot of these games could definitely be redone. Unless Sony just stupidly has sold the video game rights to things like Total Recall, not realizing that they might be worth something, and now they would have to try and claw back their video game rights from people who are just sitting on them. District 9, I don't think had a video game. Hook, I mean, after what is it? Robin Williams died, people liked him quite a bit. It would not be crazy to say, hey, let's make a video game based on some of his performances. Elysium, you would have thought there would have been a game around that. Gone with the Wind, yeah. Try to make a video game based on Gone with the Wind. That would be an interesting experience, or attempt at least. This would get people through the door to at least try it. There's no reason why there shouldn't be more Rocky boxing games out there. There is one that's, I think, a VR game, but not a lot. Jerry Maguire, don't believe there's any video games around that. I think there were some movie tie-in Da Vinci Code games, but they weren't particularly good. Anytime there would have been a drought in Sony's lineup, they should have been able to say, hey, let's go through the list of movie license and just hire some company somewhere to make something. Doesn't even have to be particularly good, but Sony has kind of stubbornly said, no, all of our games have to be just excellent, and our scope and our releases have to be so small. That's why when they're showing off the Sony PlayStation 5, they're literally showing off 6 games in total. A Rain Man video game might be interested. Dances with Wolves might be interesting. You'd have to work really hard to make something like The Pursuit of Happiness make sense. Hannibal, though, I think works fairly well as a horror video game. Few Good Men. The Charlie's Angels. There probably was a Charlie's Angels video game, but I don't know if it was based on the 2000 movie or a previous movie. Don't think there was anything based on Inferno. Yeah, I think you'd have a hard time making a video game based on an Adam Sandler video series, any Adam Sandler movies. The Patriot makes a lot of sense as potentially a loose story. And then you have the Resident Evil movies, at least being published by Sony, and that didn't mean there were ever any Resident Evil movie tie-ins games. The Karate Kid remake, that easily could have had a video game around it, and probably did have some loose thing that ended up on the Nintendo DS. Mask of Zorro definitely should have been more of a AAA game around that. I don't think you could do Sleepless in Seattle. You definitely could do Angels and Demons. I don't think you can do My Best Friend's Writings. It'd be very interesting to see people try to do comedies and romances and dramas in video game form, because that's what we're really missing. And honestly, if they were just going to make Telltale games based on these stories, that probably would work fairly well. Triple X should have had a better tie-in video game. The ones that did get video games often were kind of mediocre movies that also had mediocre games in it. And maybe no matter how much money you put into something, it just fails miserably. And maybe that is inherently the problem with Sony as a giant corporation in general, is that they're they're putting a lot of good money after bad investments, and they just actually lose money, not just Hollywood accounting, but they actually lose money when they try to make a AAA action blockbuster and it gets a 5.4 and a Metascore of 39. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon totally should have been a video game. I don't think there was. Ghost Rider should have had a video game tie-in. Rambo, I think there was a video game based on Rambo, but I don't think it was in the era of PlayStation 2. A lot of these would definitely be remakes of old movies, and potentially this is us making a new version of a Rambo game, even though there were Rambo games before. And maybe Sony was so burned in the first and second generation of video games that they just said a blanket no to licensing video game movies to be turned into video games, even to themselves. I think Close Encounters of the Third Kind could have been a video game. Hancock definitely could have a tie-in spin-off. Salt definitely could have had a video game. There probably was a mobile phone, Cloudy with the Chance of Meatball games. I vaguely recall there being something like that. White House Down looks like it could have had a video game in it. It would be really interesting to see somebody with passion try and make Philadelphia into a video game. Bad Boys 2, 22 Jump Street. All of those easily could have a video game tie-in. RoboCop, I believe, did have a video game tie-in, but the movie and the game weren't particularly interesting. There definitely should have been a Stuart Little video game tie-in. Air Force One easily could have a tie-in. After Earth could have a tie-in. Pixels being a terrible movie, though. I mean, you almost would assume that even before they shot the first scene, there would have been a video game tie-in to Pixels. Godzilla clearly should have had video game tie-ins. And even if these are even if they weren't sure whether Godzilla 1 in 1988 was going to be good, which by these scores it really wasn't that good, you still would have wanted to double down and try and promote it, or 10 years later try and build some nostalgia for it and make a game based on it. There is a Smurfs video game coming out fairly soon, but if it is supposed to be in any way connected to the 2011 Smurfs movie, you're talking over a decade late on that. Green Hornet, sure, you could try to make a video game. They're going the opposite direction with the Angry Birds movie, turning what it was a mobile cell phone game into a video game. And ironically, the Angry Birds movie seems to be better rated than a lot of the other Sony movies. What is shocking me so much on IMDb, who I would have specifically thought would have given better scores to movies, it's shocking how this top 10 list is just highlighting how poorly received Sony movies have been, not just in the last 3 or 4 years, but over the course of at least a decade and a half. Battle Los Angeles, another game that looks like it could be made a game. You could easily make a kind of joke puzzle game around something like Look Who's Talking. And at a certain point, maybe video game companies wouldn't want to make a puzzle game where you're controlling a baby who is working their way through a puzzle platformer, and would just rather make it their own game that's not a licensed tie-in. So I could also see why specifically Look Who's Talking never had a video game based on it. And that would explain a lot of why a lot of these haven't been licensed. But if I was the CEO of Sony, I would say, let's acquire some businesses, and maybe that is what they're going to do fairly soon, is start acquiring a lot of small and medium tier video game companies and saying, hey, here's our licenses, make something with our license. The game only has to barely be connected to it. Vertical limit, like you could easily have had a very loose tie-in to a ice climbing video game and tie in vertical limit, for instance. I've never even heard of this movie, Journey to the West, The Demons Strike Back, and that came out in 2017. Yep. And then here we have The Mermaid, which looks like it's a more Asian release. Yeah, these two movies at the very bottom here strike me as what Sony has probably been trying to do, which is publish and release more Chinese movies worldwide and get into the China market, which I don't think has really helped anybody. But just think for a second, where after spending all of the time looking at all of those games, why were we looking at movies that Sony had? It's because the Sony Interactive Entertainment division of Sony large, the overarching Sony corporation, complains that their games don't have as much reach as he would like. How could you have more reach and bring in more people? Get people's attention by having games based on movies they like. Bring in the movie viewers to play video games. And that's not the only avenue by any means in which you could do that. Sony Music is huge. Arguably, Sony Music and Universal Music Group, which is Warner Brothers, have a duopoly on the, I would say, probably 90% of all music made in at least the United States, if not the world. There is zero reason, and it would be so much easier to have your Sony Music people, your musicians, bring in make a new song that's hot on the radio. Let's see. I hate to name WAP as the only song that I can think of that's a relatively recent song, but yeah, let's just go with WAP. As controversial as it may be, as controversial as that song is, if you put WAP in the next Call of Duty and you promoted heavily that this song is in the next Call of Duty, I think you bring in a few more people's of interest, because that is kind of a crazy thing, particularly for that song to say and do, and I think people would want to see how you get that to work. And if you can take that idea and expand upon it even more, so that there was entire albums included with or included in video games, that would catch a lot of people's attention too. Like, very few people are buying CDs anyways, so if you're saying the next GTA is kind of a great example of this. Next GTA includes the entire new album of I'm picking like all the wrong people, but let's go with Lil Nas. I'm just picking the controversial people I've heard as somebody who doesn't listen to music at all. But yeah, if Lil Nas's entire new album is available day one release or even like a week later in GTA 6, that may bring some more people interested in buying the video game instead of trying to buy the album separately. It's a tie-in worth trying to do. Shockingly, Sony doesn't even have like a Let's Dance or Guitar Hero product that they're offering, even though it would be incredibly easy for them to negotiate a ton of Sony music for a Guitar Hero, Beat Saber type game.
I won't let you get away.
Sony is in a particularly unique position to do that. Microsoft can't compete with that. Nintendo can't compete with that. And yet Sony has failed to do it. And I think that is kind of the frustration with Sony in general, is while Sony could have easily become a Disney competitor in the just massive amount of content that they own and that they can license, and as far as movies, music, video games, they have been incredibly bad at leveraging their own products. Anyways, that was a bit of a rant. Video Games Chronicle has an article here. The Virtuoso employee, or Virtuos employee, it's a company, has confirmed that an unannounced remake is in production for this Chinese firm. It's a unannounced AAA action-adventure game remake, and there is suspicion that it might be Metal Gear Solid 3, although I don't know why you would remake Metal Gear Solid 3 first and not just start with Metal Gear Solid 1 and kind of reboot the whole series. The Metal Gear series, like many of the older series of games, could easily be rebooted and remade to be a more abridged experience. If anything, one thing you can complain about the Resident Evil remakes is that they are effectively still making a one-to-one transfer in the remakes, when once you get to Resident Evil 5, that stops making a lot of sense, because there aren't going to be that many people who are particularly happy about the idea of buying a remake of Resident Evil 5 or in particularly Resident Evil 6. And I suppose they have some time there, but Resident Evil 3 could have easily been Resident Evil 3 and Code Veronica, and Resident Evil 2 and 3 could have been merged together too, because it mostly takes place in the same area. Yeah. I think if you were to go back and remake the God of War games, you could easily merge a few of those games and a few of those concepts. Get rid of some of the grind and instead have... Well, that was kind of a nice reward. I got lucky and got one victory. Overall, though, we need just a ton of Forcecraft victories, and I need to play a ton of this, which, yeah, we're halfway as far as all the play points, but let's see. Do we need any actual ranked victories, or can we just play unranked? I think in an effort to save time, we just play unranked, rotation, fairies, and go. Let's see. Video Game Chronicle says Amico games are now available, despite the fact that the console doesn't even have a release date. These are definitely being designed to evoke the feel of the original Intellivision packaging for these games. That being said, it is totally worth mentioning that unless I am completely mistaken, Intellivision went out of business and has been acquired and reacquired several times. And this is just a new company trying to convince people to enjoy it. Interesting. There seems to be some kind of commemorative coin. And then there are these cards, which I wouldn't be surprised if these are just straight up NFC cards that the games themselves are preloaded onto the system, and there is actually no large amount of memory in them. NFC cards, contact cards, tends to have less than 10 megabytes, I would say, of space at most. So even for a particularly old game like Moon Patrol, for example, that probably would fit, but I bet that's not how they're doing it. I bet the cards barely have a few kilobytes of space on them, and it's just some kind of serial code. I bet it's not even a particularly unique serial code, and that you could fairly easily hack it to just play all these games. But why would you even bother to go that route when you could simply just have the ROMs for these Intellivision games? And it's not like anybody was really clamoring at the bit to play first generation video games anyways. I know my opinion on that is definitely based on my own age and my own experience, whereas I was playing Super Mario Brothers and that was the first games I ever played. So I don't care about anything before Super Mario Brothers on the NES. But I think if you put a new kid in front of Super Mario Brothers, they're willing to play it. If you put them in front of something that looks like an Atari or an Intellivision game, they will not play it.
Let's speed things up.
And there is a vast amount of games in the second, third, fourth, fifth generation that are not historically relevant and not worth playing. The one that comes to mind as being very much on the borderlands, on the line, is Super Mario. No, not Super Mario Bros., but the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles NES game. While it visually looks like a game worth playing, I would actively stop people from letting kids play that game, because if they try to play if a kid tries to play the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles NES game, they are going to be incredibly frustrated and incredibly upset very quickly. By the time you get to that underwater level, yeah, you're going to be very frustrated and very upset. And you have to not let kids get that upset these days. Like, it's they have better things to do at their time than bang their heads against unfair and sometimes impossible NES games, or things that were just not really kid friendly, because kid friendly games kind of do require you to be a little bit easier than the old games were.
The hunt has only begun.
Moving on, GTA Trilogy remasters are set for a December boxed release. Retail sources point to last gen physical arrival before Christmas, digital details unconfirmed. Which, yeah, we're seeing enough leaks of information about the GTA Trilogy that is totally believable. start another game real quick. Video Game Chronicles says Best Buy is selling PS5 consoles, but access is restricted to its new $200 membership scheme. So now they want you to join their membership to get the limited quantity of things. Yeah. It's called the Total Tech Protection Plan. I wouldn't be surprised with the scarcities happening if we start to see this happen a lot more, where companies are going to say, hey, you have to pay us and become a member to get access to this. Costco and the warehouse sellers have always had that scheme, certainly, so it's nothing particularly new, but it is fairly blatantly obvious what's going on here is that the retail stores are trying to make as much money as possible, and when you come to something like the PlayStation 5, even being a member in the Total Protection Plan probably is not a guarantee in any way that you would actually be able to buy a PlayStation 5, because they're still going to have shortages. See, Video Game Chronicles says Metroid Dread enjoys the series' biggest launch ever in the UK. I watched a YouTube video that kind of explained the timeline of Metroid, and it's a little bit more complicated than I thought it was. But I think it also kind of doesn't really matter too much as far as what the story of Metroid is, because they haven't done the greatest of jobs of giving Metroid or Samus Aran that much personality or that much connecting story. Which, in all fairness, Mario doesn't really have any connecting story from Mario 1 to Mario Odyssey.
Stop it.
And that works fairly well for most Nintendo games. Zelda maybe has a connecting story, but it's very loosely mentioned and is not. It's perfectly fine if you don't know the Zelda timeline. And if anything, I think Nintendo has shown that making series with no real connecting story has worked way better than trying to do like the Tomb Raider reboot that gets only 3 games, or the Uncharted series, which really only had 4 or 5 games, or you have the God of War series, which is basically a soft reboot at this point after 4 or 5 games. Halo barely has any story in it. Like, Gears of War had a fairly long story to it, but they didn't really do enough with it.
Let's play. We doing this?
These wheels turn for him.
Okay. Can we evolve this so it's live after the fact?
The hunt has only begun.
It lost your third-rate commerce, me well.
Darn it! I won't lose next time.
Let's play. Yeah.
Why did this evolve? I have no idea why that evolved.
Still got far to go.
From what I can tell, the Metroid Dread series
This is more than
is fine. It sounds like it's a pretty good game. It does feel like it is just where the original NES Metroid had to go to try and because you really couldn't have it just be a
I'll get it right this time.
a sole flat 2D
I won't let you
game,
get away.
and they're struggling to get Metroid Prime made, obviously. So
My loyalty is ironclad.
So this is freedom. Yeah.
I refuse to fail.
so yeah, I think the Metroid series has to stick with its 2.5D style, or Nintendo needs to put a ton of money into making sure Metroid Prime 4 actually comes out fairly quickly and start development a Metroid Prime 5, a Metroid Prime 6.
You forfeit your life.
What they really should do is spin off a character. Spin off a character that would be more of the flat 2D style and say this is how the Metroid series is going to go forward, is that Metroid will not be Samus Aran anymore, and then we are going to make a Samus Prime series. And that way there is a very consistent situation that happens where you are, when you play a Samus Prime game, it's a 3D open world AAA game, and when you play a Metroid game, it's more of a 2.5D Metroidvania game. And at a certain level, you probably would start to move the Prime series with a different character other than Samus Aran into having less Metroidvania features in general. And is more of a just 3D platforming for 3D platformer game with maybe a little bit of puzzle aspects and a little bit of item collection, but it's mostly just a first-person shooter.
Nice
Moving on,
marksmanship.
Video Game Chronicle says Animal Rights Group urges the removal of Far Cry 6 cockfighting minigame. This is PETA saying they want this. Yeah, it seems like almost every Far Cry game tries to both have a little bit of controversy to get people's attention. This looks very weird the way this is animated. These chickens. Let's see. It's got like a little Mortal Kombat joke on it. Yeah, it seems like Far Cry games try to have a little controversy and then desperately try to avoid it. But for the fictional world that they are creating, it would be kind of silly to not address it. And I don't think this is really like something that they should care about. One thing I can say, as my understanding, actual cockfighting, if they're trying to have them kill each other and rip each other apart, they'll put hooks on their talons. So they're not doing that. And yeah, this is literally just a joke Mortal Kombat thing. And I think this is kind of a funny way to admit that, hey, in a lot of these countries, this does happen. Whether legal or not, this happens even in the United States. And if you don't want to engage in it, that's fine, but you really can't give in to censorship, and at a certain point, this is a very funny joke way to talk about a subject that actually does occur. And if PETA was a better company in general, these most of these animal rights groups, PETA in particular, are awful companies, and they're trying to just get more people to donate to them, and they don't really help animals. They would use this as an opportunity to start a better dialogue. Because what I think PETA's response to this is, we want to thank Far Cry 6 for bringing the subject of cockfighting to the forefront, so we can have a actual conversation about why we think it's cruel and why we think it's wrong in the real world, but we don't really care about it in the digital world. If anything, PETA, if they were a smarter company, they should say, yes, please do all of your cockfighting in Far Cry 6 and not in the real world. Because these are fictional characters, and you're really getting back to that same dumb argument that people make, is that, well, virtual violence is the same as real world violence, when it just totally isn't, and it never has been. When Shakespeare, a Shakespearean play has somebody die, that's not somebody in the real world actually dying. So animal rights groups should be happy about this, because anybody who wants to experience this can see it here. And yeah, there is, to my understanding, two types of cockfighting. There's a more legitimate, we don't want to lose our chickens because we've trained them and they're kind of our prize mule, and if not pets, that they actually care about, and they don't want them just tearing each other apart and dying after the first fight. And I think it is also worth pointing out that it doesn't take much encouragement to get chickens to fight like this. Like, the pecking order is a real thing, and chickens will fight like crazy, particularly if they're of different species or different groups. So, yeah. It kind of behooves humans to not allow chickens to fight like this, in the same way you wouldn't really allow dogs on the street to fight each other to turn themselves into bloody messes. But yeah, it is kind of nature, and nature is sometimes just not pretty. But yeah, as I see it, this is the same censorship argument that makes no sense, that fictional fighting and fictional violence either makes more people interested in doing it in the real world, or in some way is just bad even though it's fictional. And I can never get behind that flawed logic. And it would be very hard for me to side with PETA anyways. The only people I think that really side with PETA are either so crazy in love with animals that they are to the point of hysteria. They're just hysterically in love with animals and would do anything, say anything, lie, cheat, and steal to protect every single animal possible. Or people who are just not in the know about how bad PETA in particular is, and how ineffective that charity / organization really is.
My quarry won't escape that easy.
Let's go through some games.
Time to get started.
Here we have a game called Manufacturer 2022. We may have already talked about this one. It's early access, $17.99. Here we have a game called Eno World, which looks like nothing. It's $8.99 English full audio. Here we have a game called Bowman, which looks like it is a top-down twin-stick shooter in a Zelda-looking, or in all fairness, Robin Hood-looking outfit. Yeah, I guess Zelda in a green cap really is just Robin Hood. $2.99 English only. That's obviously going to be a no. I did see a review for the game Succubus. It is, from the one YouTuber that reviewed it, way better than Agony. Actually playable, actually something that you can tolerate and play compared to Agony. But that is about all you can say. It seems like Succubus really is just a collection of arenas in which you fight people, and the gameplay mechanics and the fighting is just not particularly worth playing. So yeah, while I think I could probably spotlight Agony, I wouldn't play it all the way through. I'd probably put an hour into it just talking about, hey, there's no relevancy here and no real reason to play this other than the fact that it's a prequel to Succubus. And then even if I was going to play Succubus, I think there probably would be a very deep feeling that it wasn't worth your time to play that game also. So maybe Mad Mind Studio, third time's the charm, will be able to take it into a deeper direction. I definitely have the feeling that you may just consistently see a lot of yeah. I think you'll probably see a lot of Mad Mind games come out that sell well enough to fund them to make their next game, but they never put any more effort above that. Where ideally we would like to see Mad Mind Studio or some other company, the makers of Scorn perhaps, make a game that can be an X-rated game, a mature audience only game, and it is looked on the same level as something like Eyes Wide Shut, which even at that you're talking a Stanley Kubrick film.
I thought I lit the fuse.
So here we have a game called Seduction, which is mixed reviewed, unfortunately, so I think I have to dismiss it. It looks a little too rough. Looks kind of just like it's a point and click adventure. $7.19 English and Chinese, and yeah, that doesn't help it either if it feels like it's a cheap Chinese game.
You have summoned the blade of purgation here.
Raise the price.
And it seems like what you're playing as is a monk that's just wandering through some scary environments. It doesn't seem like you're really getting anywhere close to a succubus type seductive monster even.
May the forest be at peace.
Let's see.
Well met, and farewell.
The hunt has only begun.
Say goodbye. Your time is so much for that axe.
Okay.
Quibble your head, loser.
I'll see you in purgatory.
And see, this says a Bane shot, so we shouldn't do that. Here we have My Furry Dictator, which is a visual novel with sexual content. Is there a reason specifically why I would want a anthropomorphic fox dictator story? $2.99 English only. I mean, I feel like this just comes to too specifically And visually, it just doesn't look like there's much to show in the background. So I don't think there's enough effort here.
I won't miss next
It really feels like it just falls into too unique of a fetish that really is for maybe 1,000 people on the entire planet, and that's it. So I just don't think there would be enough relevance there. And at a certain point, I feel if I got really popular on YouTube, I wonder if people would start gifting me games like this just to troll me and have me covering them, and probably wouldn't have a big problem covering something like My Furry Dictator, but I just don't think I'd enjoy it in any way. I'm not interested in betting a dictator, a socialist dictator it seems, or betting a anthropomorphic fox. So it really is not the one for me. And at a certain point, some of these niche things probably find their audience as much as they should anyways. I would be much more interested in something like this, Peachy Adventure, which is a sexual content, large-chested anime girl seems to be the theme this time, where you're, I guess, cutting out pictures, parts of the pictures, very basic gameplay. There seems to be some kind of rock, paper, scissors mechanic as a second gameplay mechanic. But yeah, it doesn't look like there's much here. $1.19. Claims to have full audio for every language it supports. Claims to support a lot of languages. I wouldn't be surprised if there really is only 4 or 5 images in a game like this. That seems to be how that goes very often.
This is the end.
That was almost amazing.
Let's play.
And seems like we just get adult games. Maybe we're getting them in batches, but they are not being specifically held to a Friday. These are games that came out, well, actually it does say they came out on Friday, well, on the 9th. Well, maybe they did get released on Friday, and because I didn't finish all the coverage. So, like, next we have here is Misty Girls, which seems to be just more anime art with a kind of card game, like a match to memory card game. Very simplistic again. $1.79. English, French, German, Spanish. Says full audio and everything. I wouldn't be surprised if this was the exact same publisher as the previous game. And it does seem like they are getting free DLC that probably is the uncensoring DLC, if I was to guess. But it may just be free DLC. Next we have a horror game called Somnia, which is already mostly negative, so we can say no to it. Although in all fairness, these dark screenshots would have had me say no to them anyways. 33% positive of 18 reviews. VR standard versions, $8.99. English, allegedly full audio. But what is full audio actually in a horror game? It's probably just a few sound effects and that's it. Here we have a game called Time Commando, which looks like an older game being re-released. But I don't recognize this developer nor this publisher, which has a ridiculous publisher name. Seems like somebody probably just put in the wrong information. So, it seems almost like it's a point and click adventure game where it looks like it should be more of a light gun shooter game, but it's not. Problem here is I don't remember this game, and pretty much at this point, if I don't remember an old game, it's not relevant enough to me for me to bother to play it. So this is $5.99, English, allegedly full audio. I would be interested to see if somebody else remembers this game and wants to talk about it, but I bet there aren't that many people out there that do remember it. Well, that sucked. That was the wrong one to try and target. I gambled there and lost. Next we have a game on Steam here called Stone Deep, which looks like it's kind of a Fallout Shelter type game. I guess that's the new way to reference it. I'm sure there was something before Fallout Shelter that would have described it better than calling it like a tiny tower but underground game, which also would be the way. Or I should just generally call it a colony simulator. $10.79, English and German. The color palette here is pretty bad. Like, it's very, very hard to see what's different here, and what you should focus on. And I think that would be a major problem to trying to actually play a game like that. Here we have a game called The King of Warriors Battle in the Three Kingdoms, which looks like probably a Chinese mobile game if I was to guess. It definitely looks like a cell phone game. It might be a Japanese game. It definitely seems like it's kind of low effort in that there's some really weird looking characters here that don't really make sense if this was supposed to be just a set in China Battle of the Three Kingdoms story. Instead it feels like it's just kind of random characters from random different places. Maybe they're talking about a different Three Kingdoms than what I'm thinking about. Regardless, it kind of doesn't look like there's a console game here. It looks like a mobile game. $14.99 with in-app purchases, English and Korean. Okay, well that would certainly explain the weird art style as it goes, because like here you have a schoolgirl outfit and then they're fighting some magical orb wielding character, and then here you have more Mongolian horseback fighting. Then you have a archer in pink and a spear fighter in blue and white. Then you've got a guy with a big hammer as a joke character, it looks like. Yeah. It's just all over the different places. All thematically. Here's a one peaceful day, a woman suddenly appeared before Bruce. This is Bruce Lee. In Game of Death, yellow outfit. Yeah. So yeah, this definitely feels more like a joke style of game as far as its visuals, but that doesn't mean it's inherently bad. Next we have a game called Puzzle Cafe VR, which I can only assume is jigsaw puzzles in a VR environment, which at some point, if we can ever get an interface that makes sense with VR, I would understand this a little bit more. But you basically need force feedback. You need to be able to feel like you're actually without a controller picking up pieces and twisting them around and looking at them and making matches. Until you get to that point, you can't get to a point where you're doing large numbers of pieces, so you're doing these very like small number of pieces puzzles, which don't really make sense for most puzzlers. And this would have to be something that played and worked better than just using a mouse, and this definitely does not look like it works better than using a mouse. What was interesting in that video, it said there was a purchase button, but there are no in-app purchases in the game, so maybe you just have an in-app currency that you earn to purchase more puzzles. I wouldn't be surprised if there really is only a few. Yeah, purchase it button definitely exists. But that could be in-app currency to decorate. Moving on, Video Game Chronicles says Microsoft is considering allowing Xbox owners to repair their own consoles. It's the first big tech company to acknowledge the right to repair movement. Microsoft has been desperately encouraged and trying, certainly, to look like they are the good guys. It's hard to really say any corporation is actually the good guys. I definitely know that there is at least one major shareholder that has pushed for more sustainability and right to repair ideas. More activist shareholders might be the word to use. When you think about it in reality, I don't think Microsoft is in a great position to actually encourage what could very well be kids to try and fix their own Xboxes. There is not a lot that can be repaired without soldering. And once you get into that soldering barrier and saying, hey, let's let somebody desolder a chip or thermally release the thermal paste because it's stuck on there like glue. Once you get to that level, you're talking a need for the person who's doing those actions to have a decent level of experience and education in electronics. Like we are at a point where things are complicated because of chips, and maybe they intentionally made them complicated because of chips, where they just cannot be user serviced. I think you could definitely have people change their fans if the fans burn out because of the grease eventually wearing out on the frictionless fans. That's pretty easy, and even if the fans were soldered by 2 cord connectors, that's not a big change. I could see people reseating thermal paste and coolers, but there's really not much else you can do. Maybe you can change the drive out. You could definitely have people take apart the Xbox controllers and replace the analog sticks if those are broken. But I don't think there's too much else. A broken HDMI connector would require a lot of soldering. And I suspect what would really happen in a scenario like this is you would have a
amusing
way in which you could buy the components online, and maybe we would see a few more people trying to be electricians, which there used to be electricians out there that would repair appliance repairs like VCRs and things like that. very little demand these days to fix a TV or a VCR. It's not worth their time in most cases. Nowadays, if you're going to have an appliance repairman, he's probably fixing a bunch of really old equipment for TV stations and radio stations, and he probably works out of his home, and you just have to know who the person is to get the phone number, because he probably doesn't advertise at all, or she. I don't want to say it's always a guy, even though it more than likely is going to be a guy. So yeah, I imagine Microsoft might sell some parts, but I don't think they're going to do much more than that. And maybe it would eventually change how the next Xbox is made, but there really isn't that much difference that you could do. Like, replace the RAM for, if the Xbox One had replaceable, upgradable RAM, that'd be nice, but also that would mean a lot of Xbox Ones would have the RAM come loose in shipping, and then that would be a problem that happens all the time, unless they literally don't even install the RAM by default and they make the players do it. But then also you'd have to have a stick of like DDR6 RAM that is way further from the CPU, and that would hurt their performance. But yeah, I could definitely see trying to fix your controller and replacing the CD-ROM drive, replacing the fans. But that's it. Like, you're not gonna resolder these buttons. Most people wouldn't do that. You're not going to take the chip off. You're not going to take the CPU off. You might reseat the cooler. Microsoft, as far as the idea of right to repair, hasn't particularly tried to sue anybody or stop anybody from trying to fix their consoles. And in all fairness, I don't think Sony has really tried to do too much of that either. So it's more Apple and tractor, Bobcat and tractor manufacturers and car manufacturers that have tried to stop that. So in a lot of ways, this is kind of a non-story where Microsoft is just saying we're considering this, and they're going to get good press because they said they're considering something, when really they could have said, yeah, we allow this, we've always allowed this, so this was never an issue for us.
Hey, let's play, and farewell.
Moving on. Epic Games is reportedly considering making a Fortnite film as part of plans for a new entertainment division. They should. It definitely makes sense to make a Fortnite film while Fortnite still has some relevance. Although, if you make a Fortnite film and then you can't have any of the crossover characters, which you almost certainly can't, then the film itself is questionable as to who are the interesting characters of the actual Fortnite class of characters, and what story are you actually going to tell around Fortnite, because there's really not a lot of story there.
Let my melody set your wings free.
Yep, I'm going to lose here.
Let you get away.
The wind shall carry forth my.
This is going to be yet another stream where we get no victories at all. Video Game Chronicles says Nintendo Europe has confirmed that the Switch's Nintendo 64 games will run at the faster 60 Hz, plus some games will be available in the PAL format. I kind of assume that if you plug a Switch in Europe into a dock and it goes into European TV, it might be coming out at the PAL format. but I wouldn't be surprised if it just converts over to the 60 hertz NTSC format there. Anyways, because I imagine all TVs everywhere can handle both formats, or almost all TVs can handle both formats, and it's an easy switch over. Almost certainly the switches, when they are not docked, are running at 60 hertz NTSC format. So,
My
yeah.
quarry won't escape that easy.
As much as
You a lesson you won't
most
soon
people would
forget.
probably agree that everybody should move over to the metric system and a lot of the European standards, it is not a fact that every European standard is better, and 60 hertz is better than 50 hertz. The number is bigger, it's objectively better. There's no reason to stick to the PAL format these days. Anybody who has a TV that's still on PAL could easily run a transformer inside to get it to 60 hertz. Unless you were just watching old PAL footage, but even that old PAL footage can easily nowadays be de-interlaced and framed and correctly to run at the same frames per second at 60 hertz. I don't think that's actually de-interlacing. I think that's frame interpolation is what it's called.
May the forest be at peace.
But yeah, Europe needs to just abandon the PAL format and move over to NTSC.
Did you send this breeze?
And ideally, we've only made the PAL format a bigger issue still because we have not really established whether 144 hertz is going to be the next standard or 120 hertz is going to be the next standard, because we can't honestly afford make content at any of those standards at the moment. It's
Help me
too
forest.
highly demanding. But yeah, logically it should be 120 hertz. I wouldn't be surprised if it's actually 144 hertz that becomes the next standard, as much as any TV standards are standard. Okay.
Help
So
me,
you hit
fairy.
this one to kill that.
Talk more later.
You attack here. You play here. Then we put that back on the field.
Hey, let's play.
Video Game Chronicle says FIFA could be rebranded as EA Sports FC, a trademark application suggests, which we're seeing enough story around this to make this feel like this is very possibly the way it's going to go. And it's not like I particularly care.
The uncharted desert awaits.
Alright, let's see if this works.
Let's play.
3. Hit that. And then that gives us one of those.
Hey, let's play.
Here we have a game on Steam called Forest Adventure, which looks a little lacking.
Do
Yeah.
not seek what is not there.
Particularly when you see the video of it. Like, this is assets, but I don't even know if I want to be as cruel to call this an asset flip game, because this really feels like this is somebody who found some assets that is following his frog theme somewhat and actually trying to make a game. But the problem is this feels very much like a student project and not a finished product. It has no heads-up display other than what is being clipped off in the lower left-hand corner here. The actual gameplay looks slow, boring. It seems like there's literally just one slime monster. You seem to have one environment. It's 59 cents, English only. Two fairies.
At 12 o'clock.
And then this.
Don't hurt me.
The hunt has only begun.
Bad people are evil. Stay away.
Hit that.
A fitting end. Hey, let's play.
Yeah, we have a game called Union Addict, which doesn't seem to have anything to really do with the word union.
Personal. It's just
Its color palette is way too weird and bright. It's odd to say the least.
it's time to end.
It's just way too much red shift in this image.
It's all the same. to
Early
me.
access, $9.99, whole bunch of languages.
Stop
That's
it.
definitely going to be a no. Here we have a game called Tales from Our Room, which looks like an RPG Maker garbage game. $2.99, English only. I updated my Windows and then all of a sudden all my sound was messed up on OBS and I had to spend an extra couple of minutes, probably 10 or 20 minutes, trying to figure out how to get audio to play back
Report this
in my weird setup. Which, in all fairness, my weird setup is weird, so there probably is a room for
Nice
improvement.
marksmanship.
Yep, and still losing at Shadowverse. Let's see, here we have a game called Crazy Invader Shoot 'em Down, which obviously is a low effort name for a low effort shooter asteroids game. Although it is trying to do something slightly different by having you in the middle of the screen and spin around. Although I have seen
My
that
core
gimmick
won't
done
escape
before.
that easy.
It's kind of like
fighting in
Zumba,
despair all
but
you
faster.
know?
$2.69, English only, allegedly full audio. Here we have High Poker 3D Texas Hold'em, which what we don't want to see here is in-app purchases of any kind. Because even if there are like cosmetic in-app purchases, it will be impossible to tell. And I don't think Steam lets you have ads in your game. Looking at this, it looks like there is a premium currency and another premium currency and real world in-game currency as far as chips. I desperately would like to see a poker game that's good. This one is MMO, so it's only multiplayer online. It has in-app purchases. You start with, this is very much like the mobile poker games. You start with a number of chips. You get free chips every day. Yeah. This is all the bad things that you don't want to see in a poker game on Steam. And while the character creators are nice, you're saying you do have to use the gold premium currency to get cosmetic things. And clearly this is just a mobile game. And there almost would be an argument to a mobile version of a good version of this game that didn't have in-app purchases. But yeah, I've yet to see anybody actually try to do that. It would make a lot of sense for somebody like Microsoft or Sony to make a poker game. And Microsoft did many years ago make a poker game. That way they could win hearts and minds and bring people who are more obsessed around playing
May the forest be at peace.
playing poker, bring them into the gaming world, the video gaming world versus the gaming gambling world a little bit more. It would have made a ton of sense during the pandemic and people not going to Vegas, where I imagine a lot of gamblers do just go to Vegas several times a year. It would have made a lot of sense for Microsoft to have come out with a stay-at-home play poker quick game, or Sony to do that, or even Nintendo to do that. Stay at home, play these games online. We'll have a poker night every Friday. But yeah, I've seen none of that. And I assume that people were just caught off guard. Ideally, though, for giant companies like Microsoft, they should have a poker game in their back pocket in some form factor at any time. Like, it wouldn't have been too hard for, like, day one of the lockdown to be announced, for them to acquire and just purchase outright the rights to a mobile poker game full of in-app purchases, and said, hey, we're going to port this as quickly as possible to Xbox. So there's probably already a poker game on Xbox. So they should have just been able to day one purchase that, put it on Xbox Games Pass, remove the microtransactions from it very quickly, like in less than a week. And there was just nothing like that, oddly. Moving on, Monster Hunter Rise won't support Switch and PC cross-saves or cross-play, Capcom says, according to Video Games Chronicles. Then the Bloodborne producer, this is a Gematsu article, Masaaki, I suppose that's how you would pronounce it, Masaaki Yamagiwa has joined Team Ninja. I think we had talked about this before, but it does kind of go to show that Sony not really supporting the Bloodborne producer enough to keep him around, so this is in direct opposition to the idea of the Sony Interactive Entertainment boss saying, I wish our games could be more accessible to more people. Like, you're not accessible to the people making the games as Sony of Japan has become sidelined more and more. So why would particularly the Japanese market that take loyalty as an absolute most important thing you could possibly do is be loyal to a company that you work for or a company that supports you. Like this loyalty will not stand in the Japanese audience and in Japanese creators. I have never seen an instance where so many Japanese producers and top tier notable people in the industry have left Japanese companies, not just Sony companies, but just Japanese companies in general, which implies to me that the entirety of the Japanese game market is on the verge of major change, if not a bubble bursting or a collapse happening. Moving on, we already talked about Corpse Party, but we'll mention it again, I think. Corpse Party 2021 remake is coming to the West on October 20th for the PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC. This is a very well received horror RPG maker game, which, as much as I'd like to find an excuse to not play it, I don't think there is a lot of excuse to not play it. It also, being a fairly old game, is going for more of a 90s art style. A little bit before Moe became a big thing. So the characters here are going for more of a 90s anime feel than what the 2000s animes would look like versus the 2010s. And that may actually help Corpse Party succeed a little bit better because the characters do tend to look a little bit more anthropomorphically accurate as far as their age. A new Prince of Tennis game has been announced for the Switch. This was a manga that I think was very popular for a long time. I guess popular enough to deserve a new game. Gamatsu says, and that's all we know for now. That's a interesting headline, but it is unknown to me particularly whether a Prince of Tennis game would actually be a tennis game or whether it would just be a visual novel game. It kind of has to be a little bit of both. It would disappoint the fans of Prince of Tennis if it was simply a tennis game with characters that kind of looked like the characters from the manga and the anime. But I think it would also disappoint people buying a game that says tennis on it, and then there being no actual tennis in the gameplay. That also opens up the possibility of there being a bad tennis mini game in it that is not worth really playing. So we'll have to wait and see, and I'm sure they'll hype it up more. Gamatsu says the PlayStation Japan Play live stream is set for October 16th, featuring Dragon Quest X offline, Elden Ring, and Horizon Forbidden West. Kind of a completely different message and presentation being done for the Asian market compared to what is promoted and talked about in the Western market, although there is some overlap between the games. Let's see.
Got you in my sight. Astral Holder.
All I need's an opening and you're toast.
Can we evolve?
This is
Yes.
the end.
Sorry, but the time for one helping of this and it's
There we
nighty
go.
night for you.
Now you've done it. Yeah. No.
I may actually win here.
Stop.
Let's see. Star Wars Jedi Knight Collection and Star Wars Racer and Commando Combo launch October 26th on PS4 and November 16th on Switch, which we saw an announcement for this, but for Star Wars re-releases of old games, even if they're not particularly the best Star Wars games, there's really not enough fanfare happening around this. You would think that Disney, Sony,
Got your
not
message loud and
Disney
clear.
or Lucasfilms would want to put some more advertising around that. Here we have a game called Fallen Capsule on Steam that looks like nothing of interest. 99 cents, English only. And then a $5 developer DLC donation, which I don't want to say that developer donations shouldn't exist. They should exist on Steam. The idea of giving bits and might even make a lot of sense on Steam, where you could say, hey, I've got a few cents from selling a trading card. I'm never going to spend those few pennies. Let me donate that penny to this developer. That all makes decent sense. I could even see like a Patreon like effect where you just want to support a developer in through Steam. Steam would probably love to take a smaller cut for that, or just support that and not even take a cut. But making it look like content for this game, as that's labeled, is wrong. There should be something else. Another layer here, another button here. Ideally, you might even put it directly under here where you just have buttons where you can give pennies or give a monthly subscription to the developer. Of course, you run into the problem of the massive amount of what feels like money laundering already happening on Steam, so it becomes questionable for them to potentially make it even easier to money launder. But I don't think Steam particularly cares either, so I don't think Valve cares.
I won.
I'm surprised I won there. But we can see not really succeeding greatly. One more lucky victory would get a few of the daily quests done, but I would need at least one more to get the rest of it done. Here we have a game on Steam called Blood of Titans, which looks like just a mobile phone game. Doesn't look terrible as a mobile phone game, but also kind of doesn't look like anything of interest. They're calling it a trading card game, but it really seems more like a resource management game. It's free to play with in-app purchases. It's English and Russian. It's an MMO. All of those tell me I'm not interested. Here we have a game called Eternium, which unfortunately is mixed because it actually does look like something that has a chance of being interesting as kind of a Diablo-esque clone. It definitely feels very similar to Diablo. It has jumping, which that's interesting. Free to play with in-app purchases. Whole bunch of languages. Third-party EULA. It's a shame it's bad. I'm still kind of looking for a good Diablo competitor out there and have yet to find it. Here we have a game on Steam called Settlement Survival, which is just a city sim. Doesn't look particularly great, but doesn't look particularly bad either. It's rated very positively, 1349, and English, Chinese, French, German, Russian, and Spanish Latin America. Yeah, even though it's rated very positively, I don't think there's a game here I want to play. These are just not my style of games, so I'm going to say no. Here we have Matching Cats, which obviously is just going to be a memory game. $1.59, English, Portuguese, Brazil. Yeah, not asking a lot, but not something that I think you probably would want to buy. Here we've gotten a free disconnect. Nice.
Looks like I won.
So now we're just looking for 2 more wins. One of needs to be a Forestcraft or Havencraft, so we can move over to Havencraft and play different. Here we have a game called Orpiment on Steam, which, yeah, doesn't really look like much of a game. I kind of like the art style. It is a very unique art style. I'll grant it that, but the art style doesn't play towards anything other than what looks like a turn-based fighting game. And that they're calling it a roguelike game based on a deck building game. Early access, $14.99, English and French. This is potentially a game that is more around the idea of a French artist art style and French history, and that's nice. Nice to see other cultures try and include their own history instead of, say, Ubisoft, which is a French company, but well, he doesn't do any French style content. I'm gonna put this on the fall list. $14.99 is a lot, however, and I wouldn't be surprised if this never gets reviewed enough, or it never gets played enough, or it just gets reviewed or played and isn't reviewed or played particularly positively. Here we have a game on Steam called Collision Hero, which looks like it's mostly asset flips and MS Paint level graphics. Does not look good. It's free to play, English only, so I guess the price is at least right. Here we have a game called Sound Dodger, which looks like a mess of visual shapes dodging music. Not the kind of game I would play, having no rhythm. Early access $17.99. Some of the prices on these games are getting ridiculously high, and it looks like we're going to be fairly quickly done with all the games, which is good since we started late. Gamatsu has Evil Genius 2 World Domination for PS5 and Xbox Series and PS4 and Xbox One, launching November 30th. I don't think the World Domination subtitle includes anything different than what the game itself is. I think World Domination is just a subtitle. Yeah, on Steam it's known as Evil Genius 2 World Domination, so it's not like it's a deluxe edition of the game with a season pass, although ideally it would be the deluxe edition. This one seems to have Denuvo in it and third-party EULA, and while in the last 30 days it's 73% positive, 200 reviews, overall it is still only 63% positive. And while I do have it on the wish list, I would almost certainly struggle with some of the quality issues and the problems. Like, you can see there is a fairly consistent number of negative reviews over the history of this. It's in line with the number of positive reviews, really. Not seeing any major spikes or anything that say, oh, this is simply because it has Denuvo in it, it got review bombed, without people actually playing the game. No, people actually played the game and gave it a chance. And if I vaguely recall, reviews pretty much said Evil Genius 2 wasn't as well thought through and designed as Evil Genius 1 anyways. And it's just not as satisfactory of a game. Which even Evil Genius 1 probably wasn't that good of a game as it could have been. Gamatsu says the horror game Kurosame ga Furu Mori remake has been announced for PC. Don't recognize this game though. Let's see. So yeah, this doesn't look like a game that's ever come out to the West. And I guess they're not particularly guaranteeing that it will support English either. The original game was a freewheel game built on RPG Maker 15 Ace, released in October 2013. Yeah, I think we will start to see an increasing number of games that were made on RPG Maker and managed to actually gain a fan base, all of a sudden now have to remake themselves and re-release themselves under more standard engines, because I bet the support for old versions of RPG Maker isn't that high, and people don't want to play games that look like RPG Maker. They flooded the market. Bad developers flooded the market with RPG Maker content.
At your service.
You're done for.
And in all fairness, Unity has the danger that could happen too. There could be a point 10, 15 years from now where anything made in Unity looks like a bunch of garbage games and people are not willing to play them, and people are only interested in hyper realistic graphics that you would see in something like the Unreal Engine. Let's see, Komatsu has the Call of Duty Vanguard story trailer. If you're interested in that, check it out. I'm not. Game developer says Rockstar is delisting GTA 3 trilogy in favor of a remastered collection, which I guess there was a trilogy that existed. Yep. When was it released? When was it listed? Somewhere. See, I'm confused here because it kind of feels like the trilogy was just announced, but that was probably the remaster trilogy, and I would say the original trilogy feels like it should have been out for years. But I'm not quite getting that information, so I'm not 100% sure. And they don't have a link to the old trilogies. It'd be kind of silly to buy the old trilogies at this point too, unless there's just something very different about the remastered version. But honestly, if you hadn't cared about GTA games up until this point and bought them, which I am included in the group of people that doesn't really care about GTA games, you're not really gonna miss much if you did play the remastered version for the first time and that's your first experience. GameDeveloper.com says Nacon has acquired the Dead End Studio Ishtar Games to create indie publishing label. I think we had already talked about this. Apple is appealing the injunction that would loosen the App Store payment restrictions.
This is more than just a game.
This is part of the Epic versus Apple lawsuit. And no duh, Apple is going to appeal it. But one of the things that people often do is they change their behavior, and I think Apple kind of has changed their behavior and loosened the app payment restrictions already in anticipation of rulings or appeals not succeeding in their favor. So they've kind of done both. They've appealed and they've changed their behavior. If the appeal goes in their way, they probably will undo any changes they make and re-tighten the app payment restrictions. Or let some people be grandfathered into the old way of things being done, but hold new people to the higher restrictions. Oh.
You were done for. Let him go! I refuse to fail.
Let's see. Do this.
You're in good hands.
And then do this. And then the turn. Let's see. Hitman 3 drives IO's Interactive's strongest year in history. So Hitman 3 being way more successful than I think IO Interactive really wants to admit. and more successful than I expected it really to be. Hitman series as it is kind of a weird series. It's falling a lot more in the category of something like a Halo series, and that I know it exists, I know it has this fan base, but it's just not the type of game that I would be so interested in that I would play Hitman 1, 2, and 3 when they came out, when the hype was at its highest. Am I gonna win here? I don't think so. Yep, I think he's wrecked me here with only one card.
We haven't lost yet.
Do this. Heal this.
Well, aren't you something?
Do this.
Go away.
Do this.
Take your victory.
Here we have a game on Steam called Wrecker Sunken Island, which looks like it is a Doom clone, Quake clone game, which I can't imagine there would be any reason why I'd want to play a new version of that kind of game. $4.96, English only. Here we have a game called Synth Ninja, which is way too much neon color, way too bright. I don't know if there's something wrong with my eyes. I don't think so. But somebody clearly thinks this looks good, and it totally doesn't. $1.19, English full audio. Maybe this does look good in VR or when you're actually in the game and moving around, but as screenshots, it looks awful. Obviously awful. Here we have a game called Book of Travels, which is mixed reviewed already. Does look a little interesting, but then I see MMORPG and a third-party account, English only. $26.99 is way too expensive. Early access is a problem also. There's, yeah, just way too many caveats here to put this on the fall list. So I have to just say no to that. Here we have a game called The Ghost Cage, which looks like an RPG Maker game. Although it looks a little bit better polished than that. It's free, so the price is right. English only. So check it out if you're interested. But if you're not, I totally understand. Let's see. GameDeveloper.com says Good Old Games has removed Hitman Game of the Year Edition from sale after the DRM 4.0. So after Good Old Games trying to defend listing something as DRM free when it literally had DRM in it, or at least an always online requirement that had some form of verification to be connected online. After trying to defend that decision, they've removed it. But here's the danger. Did Good Old Games remove it for now to get away from the controversy, and are they going to just sneak it back onto their store in a month or two, or in a few days? And did they do that to really try to say, yes, we are going to stick to our DRM free stance, or are they simply in the process of removing all the negative reviews and just trying to censor negative reviews? It very possibly is going to be a scenario where we come back in a few weeks or so when they relist it, if they ever relist it, and all the reviews have been magically erased and people are review bombing it once again. Or no, review bombing is the wrong phrase. They called this review bombing, but this, like almost every instance in which the phrase review bomb has been used wasn't really what a review bomb and what that phrase should mean, because this was legitimate concerns about the content in the game. The DRM is content in the game, and it affects how the game plays.
We're ready to sail?
If people are upset that the games
No!
cannot be played offline
Don't let it
in a good form factor that satisfies them, then that's a very legitimate complaint that should be told as a form of consumer protection, consumer advice, and should not be censored or besmirched just because
Wait, not yet.
you as a business are trying to have it both ways.
This is how you do fireworks.
The real battle begins.
Kaboom! No handiwork
This is
needed.
freedom. Send out an SOS! Ow!
So yeah, they removed the Hitman Game of the Year. Game developer has an obituary for a longtime business development exec, Sherry
My
Lutz.
thunderbolts shall guide you.
She was at Microsoft, Unity, and Wizards of the Coast. Are we going to be told how she died?
The dawn shines like a beacon of hope.
Nope, we don't know how she died. We don't know when she died, per se. Not an actual date. We don't know where she died. We know who, and we don't know why.
Resolution in my right hand.
So of the who, what, where, and why, you're given nothing. And this obituary, in particular from game developer, really goes to show how little effort is put into these obituaries, and probably if that's the best they can do, that should be the best they can do. They're just talking about her career and where she worked. They're not going into any real details. They are doing something nice here, but I've seen this not done way more often than it is done. She was described as a kind, fun, steady force, easy to get along with and hang out. And see, if you want to do that in the obituary and get people who know her get comments of how she was and how they felt about her, that's great. But compare that to the composer, the controversial Konami composer who died just last week. There is considerably more text, and almost all of it is talking about the controversies, speaking ill of the dead, which is just a bad way to write an obituary. You should just not do it. Maybe you just stick with just the facts, and maybe I could see an argument to say, hey, let's not get quotes or comments about people and positive things to say. But if you want to be nice and you want to do that, I'm not going to really complain that you did do that, but you need to be fairly consistent with that, and you need to be fairly generous on that. Like, otherwise, just stick to the facts. I would have been fine with just sticking to the facts for both obituaries, but definitely don't be a propagandist. Don't put yellow journalism. Don't push your narrative, whether it's a SJW narrative or some other narrative, in somebody's obituary pieces. Obituaries in particular are the one type of articles that people are going to come back to years later to try and get actual facts from and actual information. You don't need the great-great-grandson of somebody looking up their hit family history and saying, oh, this guy's a jerk according to this story. That's petty, it's cruel, it's ridiculous.
And beyond!
It's unprofessional.
Envy you.
And it's just unethical journalism. If journalism is going to have any ethics at all, like, you can definitely instill it and create it in the obituaries. Game developer has an interview feature here. East Awards creators shares insights on making pixel art adventures, which, yeah, I don't know if pixel art adventures as a game is even worth playing, so
Is fighting and
these are
despair
kind of
all
more
you know?
advertisements
This
in the
one's
form of
for my
features,
family.
but pretty much any feature or any interview you do with a game developer is going to be in part with video games, an advertisement for that video game. And yeah, there's no way of getting around that. And then My Games has grabbed a minority stake in 3 studios for $3 million. 2 Rogue Games, Wideview Games, and Vox Studio, according to GameDeveloper.com. Here we have a game on Steam called Gladiator Sparta. We're almost completely out of games to talk about. This is 424, English only. Here we have a game called Valley of Dragons, which looks like it's a little low polygon for a VR game. Early access, free, I guess the price is right. English only. So I guess if you have VR and you're willing to put VR on a kid and let them potentially break his $600 system, this might be interesting, although I don't think so. Like, VR and kids games won't make any sense until VR is just bulletproof, cannot be broken by the most excited hyperactive kid possible, or at least most excited hyperactive kids. Here we have a game on Steam called Evolution Warfare, which probably is just an asset flip first-person shooter. Even if it's not an asset flip, it's set on like the moon, so Evolution Moon Warfare. It's not visually attractive, and yeah, doesn't really feel like the kind of game you'd want to play. You'd have much better chance just playing the Halo collection as far as finding competitors. It's online PvP only and free to play, so I have no idea how they would ever fund themselves and continue to make content, which probably means they won't. Okay, so DC, I think the DC fandom is happening now, has announced DC Dual Force, which I am not sure who is making this game. Now, I'm fairly certain this isn't the second dinner card game, because that would have been Marvel, not DC. And if anything, it means they are beating them to the punchline. These things are loading weirdly because I'm zoomed in too much. There is, let's see, there's definitely a question about whether this is going to have real world cards or whether it's all just digital. It seems to be UK's co-limited by Cryptozotic Entertainment. And this is a license. And remember, Warner Brothers owns DC, and Warner Brothers just got acquired, so I wouldn't be surprised if this whole project was kind of abandoned fairly quickly. But maybe not. Maybe we'll see something here. These cards have different shapes, and when you make cards that have different shapes on the side, you have to either have a black border to make them rigid and nick-proof and dent-proof, or you have to have a clear plastic border, which is a thing that they were trying to do, but it made the cards particularly expensive. Also, even if you have a clear plastic border, these shapes still tell you generally what kind of cards they are. So leader cards here are probably not in the same place and played in the same way as action cards and minion cards. And action cards don't have these bumps on the bottom, so it seems like you might have 3 separate decks of cards that you play. At a certain level, there is an idea here, as I'm trying to kind of desperately get away from Shadowverse, to there is an idea around, let's see, around maybe checking this out. But as this is being depicted, it is showing a lot of animation that almost certainly will not be in the actual game. You run into the problem with DC in general, and that the Trinity plus Flash are about the only interesting characters, and except for the bad guys and Batman bad guys. Trinity being Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman.
If they don't kill you first.
Be gone.
So even if I was to check this out, I wouldn't be surprised if DC Dual Force, if it even has a digital version of the game, is not a long-term success concept. You're going to have to really bend over backwards to have 5-10 different Superman cards that do different things.
I'll be back for round 2.
And a certain amount of this definitely would be around the idea of trying to make the old DC comics relevant and interesting. The problem is the old DC comics are not relevant and not interesting because DC is rebooted and a lot of the old comics are just awful. I did hear of a Neil Gaiman book called Whatever Happened to the Caped Crusader, which just was right before the New 52 reboot, and was supposed to be like the final story for the previous iteration of Batman, and it tells multiple stories on how Batman could have died or did die, and gives the interesting endings. So I might check that out, but I have pretty miserably failed to like any of the DC comics, and I bought a ton of DC comics and got rid of almost all of them. But Neil Gaiman is the thing, I guess, that changes that. A Neil Gaiman comic is probably worth reading, even if it is in the DC universe, compared to the Sandman series, which the Sandman series is in production. Netflix has a trailer for it, so at a certain point here, I may very well recommend people watch the Netflix Sandman TV conversion and not even read the Sandman comics, which are kind of long and have a few things in them that could be better done and kind of edited it out. There's a couple of chapters in the Sandman series that could have been shorter. Let's see. Deal this. Deal this.
You crossed the line.
Actually, I could have done this. Should have played that, than that.
Smile.
Yeah, we have a game on Steam called Kingdom Fall: Dawn of the Druid, which looks like nothing of interest. Free, single player, English only, third party EULA for no reason. And we have a game called Academy Quest, which looks like an RPG Maker game. There's, I think, a disconnect here where you have anime girls as your characters in an RPG. If they're just going to be in kind of generic school outfits, it doesn't really make sense that they would be fighting slimes. I think if you're going to do that, you have to put them in fantasy outfits. And it definitely opens up the possibility where you could have them in different clothing in the fighting scenes versus in the conversation scenes. This is English and Japanese, and yeah, I just don't think there's enough there. Here we have Street Racing United, which we can pretty much dismiss immediately with that terrible thumbnail. $8.99, allegedly full English audio, allegedly English support for tons of other languages, or support for tons of other languages. Russian full audio, it says. Here we have Sliffy and the Sleepless Island, which this looks like another one of these adult games that have been censored out to be sold on Steam, where they've very roughly and poorly put on a top to this blouse, where almost certainly there's a version of this where she is just topless the whole time. And the actual game is just an RPG Maker game. There's no interest in that. $17.99, English, Japanese, Chinese. No DLC for uncensoring it, but from the looks of it, at least not on Steam. Here we have a game called Project Meta, which just looks like an asset flip game. Seems like it's got way too much going on for itself. Trying to be like a Spider-Man clone or something, but yeah, I don't think there's really any polish in any of the content that they are showing off. Early access, $19.99, English only. It's a VR game on top of it, which just seems like that would make it even more difficult to make a good thing. You have robots, you have ninjas, you're Spider-Man flying, you're shooting magic, you're throwing knives, you're in space at some point, you're fighting people in masks with guns. It's just all over the place. I'm going to start one more game here, but not really play it. Here we have a game on Steam called Chimera's Mortal Medicine Collector's Edition from Big Fish Games. It's another hidden object game. $8.99, English, allegedly full audio. The prices do seem to be going down slightly, but they do seem to spike up sometimes also. Here we have a game called Weak Point Delta. I wonder if the pricing is that there are just different tiers of pricing that people can list games on Big Fish Games. I don't think so, because the Big Fish games all look way too much the same for me to think that there are different developers making different games. It feels like it is literally one developer making just a ton of hidden object games. Weak Point Delta here is early access for $6.99 English only, and it looks like nothing of interest. Said I wasn't going to play, but we'll hit the OK button. Here we have a game called Angel's Cove, which looks like a dark screenshot horror game. I'm trying to be as generous as possible for these types of games, but honestly, I just think I would dismiss this completely. There's basically nothing it can show me that makes me think there's an experience here worth having. Yeah. $7.99 English, allegedly full audio, French, German, Spanish, and Italian. Spain Spanish. I think if you were going to make a horror game where someone was a horror investigator, they would have to have multiple levels and you would go to multiple places to investigate. Or you would go to one place and then be trapped in that place and then be desperately trying to escape the whole time. Not just wandering around. There'd have to be a lot of narrative and a lot of story, and you'd have to have a character that talked, and was interesting. If the Resident Evil 7 house
Pray that you will be
was
free
just
from
an empty
suffering.
house, Resident Evil 7 would be awful as a game. Alright, we got a free victory there. One more, and we'll be done with the daily quest. Here we have a game on Steam called Galaxies Extreme, which, yeah, just looks like it's a little lacking in polish. I will applaud them for putting a whole bunch of videos up, but I'm not going to actually look at them because that takes too long. The actual game, though, it's not quite enough. There's a beginning of a thought, certainly, to have a racing game there. That being said, the Hot Wheels game, this one is $9.99 English and Portuguese Brazil. The Hot Wheels game, which you would be a lot smarter to buy that, or like Red Out or one of these other games. Hot Wheels not being listed here as a competitor. It is out, and I am just cautiously optimistic on the Hot Wheels game. I'm waiting basically the initial 6 weeks to 6 months to see if it has microtransactions in it. If it doesn't have microtransactions in it, then and they don't add microtransactions later, then it seems like the Hot Wheels game is a big success.
I pray that you will be free
Although
from
arguably
suffering.
maybe not enough of a success as you would like to see. I suppose we'll get probably an announcement that it sold a lot over the Christmas holiday. I bet a bunch of parents buy it for their kids over the Christmas holiday, even if it did have microtransactions in it. Arguably, if I got solo player missions, yeah, I should turn this on. That way we can play the solo missions. And focus in on doing this quest. We've got a few more games, so I'm just going to leave this here. Here we have a game called Andalia, which, yeah, doesn't look like anything of interest. $11.99 English and German. Here we have Germa Auto and the Curse of the Late Streamer, which, yeah, this looks too much like a joke game. I don't hate full motion video, but I putting a full motion video game together and then animating everything else seems just like disconnected. And I may be a sucker for a point and click adventure, but and a free one definitely sounds interesting. I guess check it out if you're interested. That's what I would say. It's English only. It seems to be free. Maybe this is just an advertisement for this Germa 985, who I've never heard of, but I assume he's some kind of streamer. Maybe we'll start to see more of that. We definitely have seen like PewDiePie games and Angry Video Game Nerds games, and generally I think I've said I don't want to cover things that are just promoting other streamers or content makers because their games tend to be pretty awful anyways, and I think this definitely falls into that category. And on a bigger perspective, if I want any curation at all on Steam, I don't want to see Steam flooded with people who can manage to make a game to promote their streaming services or their Twitch feeds or their YouTube channels. Like, the last thing we need is cross promotion and advertisement flooding Steam, since Steam is already overflowing with bad games. Here we have a game called Heaven Dust 2, which begs the question is, how good was Heaven Dust 1? It's coming soon, so I don't have to really consider it, but I would like to see what the reception on Heaven Dust 1 was. 92% positive, so people did like it, but it's not on my follow list. Probably because, yeah, it's just not something I think I would really care to play. Looks like it is kind of low polygon 3D modeling while you're wandering around. Mostly it seems like you're just wandering around. It doesn't even seem like you're actually fighting zombies that much. Yeah, this is tagged as an adventure RPG, and it says you solve puzzles. This almost feels like this is what a Western company would do with something like Corpse Party, where there's just a need to have action, whereas Corpse Party, there's less action in it. Here we have a game on Steam called Cave Explorers, which obviously looks like an asset flip. $8.49, third-party EULA, English, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, German, Spanish, French, and traditional Chinese. That's going to be a no. Here we have Mosaic Hearts Prototype, which I have no need to play a prototype for a game. It's free. Is the actual game Mosaic Hearts out, though? Probably not. The actual game, when it comes out, might catch my attention. But, yeah. Not the prototype. Here we have Water Physics Simulation, which looks awful. Looks like a Terraria clone, really. $5.99, English, German, Spanish, and Russian. Here we have Bear's Restaurant, which, yeah, doesn't look like anything. Adventure game. It says award-winning, 100% positive. Well, I don't want to dismiss people's opinions that quickly. $11.69, bunch of languages. I'll give this one a follow. I've been able to not really put anything on follow today. In fact, that may very well be the first game today that I've put on the follow list. Here we have a game on called Hidden Caves. It's too pink. Simplistic one-sentence description. $5.99, English only. Yeah. Doesn't feel like they're really selling me on it. And we have ARC, Alien Raid Combat, which looks like a tower defense game of no interest. Yep. 79 cents, English only. Here we have a game called NRG, which doesn't look like anything of interest. Early access, free-to-play online PvP. I assume it's a first-person shooter, but maybe not. Maybe it's more of a tag game where you have to actually touch people. Then we have a game called Room 13, which is another horror asset flip game from the looks of it. It's already mixed reviewed. $2.99, English only. Takes 15 minutes to play. Yeah, that's way too expensive for a 15-minute game. Basically has to be free for a 15-minute game. Then we have The Cruise, which looks like nothing of interest, for 84 cents, English, allegedly full audio. And that's the last tab I even have open. So now I just need to go through my tabs, and we'll wrap up this stream, which is good. We're not even going as late as one could have, certainly, but we are still fairly late. Twitter not particularly being helpful in working Again, it does seem to just constantly break on me as far as my main Twitter feed. What you want to see from the DC fandom, and Warner Bros. Particular, is they've really got to figure out what they're going to do with the movies, and Warner Bros. Movies in general. I don't even know if that has to be particularly DC movies, or if Warner Bros. Just wants to go in a completely different direction and say, hey, we're not going to make kids movies, we're going to make adult movies, and counter program to Marvel movies, which that might not be a bad idea on their part, to say, hey, we're, for every Disney Marvel movie that comes out, we're going to put out a rated R movie that somebody is going to, the adults are going to want to go to. If anything, we're going to put out rated R movies that the kids are going to say they're going to watch the Marvel movie, but really they're sneaking in the theater to ours, which actually that doesn't help you in sales much. But yeah. Yeah, I don't know how many kids are going to theaters to watch movies anyways. But yeah, Warner Brothers needs something for their movie lineups, and they need something for their DC content also. So they do need some DC movies, even if it's just going to be a whole lot of Suicide Squad-like movies. Okay, there's not a lot to talk about, but Video Game Chronicles says PlayStation has seemingly appointed Apple Arcade's former content boss as to lead its mobile push. Yeah, if PlayStation just started releasing games on cell phones, and publishing games on cell phones, that'd be great, in line with their first-party titles. But yeah, this once again gets back to, this is PlayStation 5's lineup, and PlayStation 5 has been out for, I think, a full year now. At this point, you've got 6 games, all fairly different, so you have a chance of maybe only liking 3 or 4 of these games. Like, if you liked Astro's Playroom, for instance, there's really not enough. I can't even tell you what game this is. And then you're having to promote like a Metal Gear, Gears of War game, too. Like, yeah. Them going to the mobile market only makes sense if they have more games to talk about. And then Gamatsu says Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney 20th anniversary website has been launched. So we probably will see some celebration and probably an announcement of something. A very early announcement of something. And that'll be it. Alright, so right on the nose at 3 hours, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.